This episode of the Fiction Writers Podcast is brought to you by How to Write a Novel That Sells. Do you dream of writing a best-selling fiction novel? With the right tools, you could get there sooner than you think. Visit www.howtowriteanovelthatsells.com and unlock the secrets to writing compelling fiction taught by international best-selling author Lana Mcara. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana Mcara, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
Thinking about war is sometimes a real challenge because it's graphic, but it's also emotional. So how do we manage that? That's what we're going to talk about today. My name is Lana Mcara, and welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast. Tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Today, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Doyle Glass. Doyle is an American historical novelist and sculptor. He is best known for his best-selling nonfiction books about the Vietnam War, Lions of Medina, Swift Sword, and for also sculpting the Texas Medal of Honor Memorial in 2008 and the bronze statue, which is the bronze statue of John Squires. And if I'm mangling this, Doyle, please straighten me out.
You're fine.
Who braved enemy fire to save others during World War II and received the Medal of Honor. In his former life, Doyle worked as an assistant district attorney in Texas, and later he served as assistant attorney general in Kentucky, prosecuting some of the worst violent crimes in the state. He's a fifth-generation pioneer ranching family from a family in Midland, Texas, who was raised with an appreciation for hard work, adventure, and honor. Besides writing and sculpting, Glass's great pride is being a loving husband and father to his wife and 3 children, where they reside in Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Doyle.
Lana, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
My apologies for that introduction. You have a lot going on.
No, you're fine. Thank you very much.
I'm excited to talk to you today. I don't think I've ever interviewed a former prosecutor before. And also your topic of the Vietnam War, that is not one that we see come through very often. So I'm interested in knowing how you started that journey to write about specifically the Vietnam War.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So in the early 90s, 2000, around that time, we were honoring our greatest generation, our World War II generation, as well we should. Books and movies, Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, and we saw a lot. Band of Brothers, the HBO series, I remember the veterans, their interviews before each episode, and those touched me even more so than the story themselves, because that was the real men. Well, I grew up during the Vietnam War. I was too young to serve in the Vietnam War, but I remember it, and I remember how it ended and how really people wanted to forget about it, and how, the troops, when they came home, were not treated very well for the most part. And it came to me that is, if I want to tell stories, and I learned that I really wanted to tell these stories with the sculptures that I did, because with each sculpture, the Kentucky Medal of Honor Memorial and then the Texas Medal of Honor Memorial, each one came with these incredible stories. Well, you can't sculpt a statue of everybody. I mean, it's limiting, and there's a lot of artistic an element to that. But I decided that I wanted to tell these stories. So Vietnam was the war that I needed to talk about, because, as you said, there are not many stories about it. We have our movies like Platoon and The Deer Hunter, which have kind of their own take of what that person or director thought about it. But I wanted to get something down that was just the men that were there and what they experienced and what that was like as a legacy, not only to honor them, but for future generations to know what their grandfathers did, just as we did for World War II. So that's, and in many cases, the veterans that we're talking about in Vietnam were sons of those that fought in World War II. So that's how it happened. Then I met some great people, and the stories were riveting. And I've got to write this down.
I always say truth is stranger than fiction.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I came from that generation too, because two of my uncles were called up for Vietnam, but because we were in a religion that objected to war, they served in hospitals at various locations. They did not actually go to war, but I remember the panic that went through the family when my uncles had to go in and fill out the papers and find out what they were going to have to do, because it was such a horrendous time in our country. People now don't really seem to understand how horrible it was that our young men were called up and sent over there. And it was such a terrible, terrible situation over there.
Right. And to that point, it's been my goal and mission to honor them because they went to fight for their country. We can go into our political discussions, and clearly the war didn't end as was intended. But these young men fought just like their fathers, for democracy, for America. The same reasons. And for that alone, this is why I wanted to tell their story.
Oh, it's so valid. That is so valid. They're just young men serving their country. They did not have any control over all the political stuff that was happening at the time, just the same as our servicemen don't today. They just do what they're told. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. So did you have anything in particular, a story that just really gripped you at the time when you were starting?
Well, the book that I want to talk about is Swift Sword. And I really was honored to talk with those veterans about that battle. It's really a microcosm of the Vietnam War, a 24-hour period. And what we have is a company of Marines, about 160 men, in the Quai Son Valley of South Vietnam, called on literally in the middle of the night to go support or even rescue another company of Marines that was being ambushed by a much larger force of North Vietnamese army. And so this company, Mike Company, was called to rescue another company. They did so, and in the process were ambushed themselves by, once again, a much, much larger force. If we were talking about 157 Marines, at least 5,000 hard-earned, camouflaged Vietnamese, hard-earned, I'm meaning what's wrong, veteran is what I meant to say, well-armed, camouflaged North Vietnamese army troops who basically laid an ambush for the Marines. But for providence, luck, in a lot of ways, the whole company would have been wiped out. So when you think of Custer's Last Stand, for example, being surrounded by a much larger force, that's almost what we have here. And these men were able, through leadership, grit, honor, sacrifice, air power, we can't forget air power, were able to extract themselves and survive, and were able to basically win this operation on the ground against the North Vietnamese army. So many acts of valor, many acts of sacrifice, very chaotic, very confusing. I've noticed it on reviews on Amazon, which have been great, but some people will say, I had trouble following the action. I had trouble, you should have laid it out better. And I said, this is what it was. It was extremely chaotic, confusing. I think that J.D. Murray, who was the lieutenant in charge, described it as, trying to coordinate something three-dimensional with so many parts in the air that you very hard to do. So, and back to Lana, to your point earlier, truth is stranger in fiction, and in many cases, it's more exciting than fiction, because a lot of the acts that came out of this battle and that are talked about in the book, I could never have dreamed up to put into a fiction novel. It's very dramatic, very sad in many ways, but it was a real honor to write about them and to tell their story.
Yeah. So how did you get them to trust you enough? I know that people who came back did not want to talk about it. They didn't tell their spouse, their parent. They told nobody anything.
That's a great question. And I have some excerpts too, if you want me to read any. I can certainly do that. But when it came to getting their trust, that was huge. Normally, I would just simply have to start talking, via email usually, to the ones that were interested and just gain their trust. And that was really it. That there are still to this day many of these veterans that don't want to talk about it, don't remember what happened. They blocked it out. PTSD is so strong to this day that they don't want to relive it. So it was just a matter of slowly getting their trust, getting them to open up, and telling them that this is not only to tell their story, but the story of their friends who didn't come back, and to preserve it for future generations, so that we don't make the mistakes that we made before. And so 100 years from now, somebody might know what was the Vietnam War and what happened, because once these men and women are gone, their stories go with them. So preserving it and preserving that legacy, I think that was the real thing when talking to the veterans, to getting them to open up if they didn't want to, was preserving the legacy and to tell the story of their friends who didn't come home.
Oh, yeah.
Who otherwise are just a name on a wall. That's it.
Right. People go down there to the Vietnam Memorial and rub off the names, and that's all you got. You don't really know the person. You don't know what happened. The legacy aspect of this is amazing, and hats off to you for the vision that you had. That was not an easy job.
No, but I had a lot of great guidance from these veterans. For the Swift Sword, I had to take my hat off to J.D. Murray, who was the commander of the company, of my company. And when I told him about my desire, he said, "You need to go read a book called With the Old Breed by E.B. Sledge, which is a story out of World War II, but about a Marine who fought in the Pacific. His was an autobiography. The HBO miniseries The Pacific was based on his story. But his story is horrific. It's not glorious. It's not fun or nice or whatever. It's horrific, because that's what war is. That when we ask our men and women to go fight, it's an ugly business. So that's what I set out to do, was to make Swift Sword the equivalent of for the Vietnam War, what With the Old Breed was for World War II. And to that end, the veterans should get all the credit. I'm was really someone just putting the pieces together in book form, but thanks to them for telling me their story and sharing it with me.
Yes. And I love that, what you said there about go to this resource book. It's a different era, but it's a similar genre, similar type of story, and learn from that previous author. That's terrific advice for any writer. If you are writing a specific place or type of book, go find somebody who did it well.
Exactly. And that's a great point. And especially for nonfiction, because as a nonfiction differs from fiction, you have a responsibility with nonfiction to get it right, to get it as close as you can, to not interject yourself as the author into the story, but to tell the story of who you're talking about. And to that point, Swift Sword has had an interesting journey. I wrote the first edition, was published in 2014. And at the time, I was married. My wife had terminal cancer, and I was taking care of her and raising our young child. So I couldn't spend really the quality time with the book that I personally wanted. But because I'd interviewed all of these men, and a lot of them have passed, had preserved their interviews, the transcriptions of them, they were all in my email on the great cloud that we talk about, every single one of them. So last year, 2023, I took the old book, went back to all of these interviews, because like I said, a lot of the men are gone. And I was able to put their words right where it needed to be in what I had done before. I basically didn't finish the book. I published it, but in my mind, it wasn't finished because I didn't tell their story completely enough. So last year I went in and put their dialogue, their words where it needed to be, and it's transformed the book. It's really brought it to life. Very proud of it, just for that aspect of it, because it's very real.
Wow, that is so, and good for you to go back and revisit and up level the work. So many people I find in this writing world are in such a rush that they don't take the time to do that fine tuning and bring the work up to the next level. It takes effort. It takes patience and details. It takes all of that. And so you went back and you brought it up. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I feel great about it. And Lana, this whole journey where, once again, different from fiction, when I decided to write about one battle, I don't know the details. So I would describe it to trying to build a 3-dimensional puzzle, and you don't have the pieces. You have to go find them. And you have to go sift through the interviews to find what's needed, and then put that puzzle together. So it took a long time. These interviews, I interviewed probably close to 50 people. Took a number of years, like 3 or 4 years and we're talking a 24-hour period. But it took that long to talk to the men, ask the right questions, follow up, find the story and where it led. It's almost like archaeology in some way. It's like you find a fossil in the desert and you're sifting past the sand to find where it leads you. What you will find. But in the end, it's incredibly rewarding to see it all come together. All of these, stories from these different individuals into one cohesive piece. And I go back to that point that one Amazon reviewer said, it's so confusing and chaotic. Well, that's what combat is. Confusing, chaotic, and you have to make instant decisions, life or death, for your buddy next to you, because that's who you're fighting for, is the guy in the foxhole next to you.
So I would like to encourage our listeners, if you are writing a war story, get these books. Go look them up. And in the show notes are the links. This is real material, and it will be invaluable to you to take the time to absorb that. And here's something else, Doyle, that I encourage my students to do as I teach fiction. And that is, when you find a passage that is especially captivating in a book, it gets you. You can't let it go. It's in your mind. When you sit down and you put the book away, you're still thinking about it. Those kind of passages, get the book, take it to your computer, and type those paragraphs out. Now, you're not plagiarizing. You're not stealing anything. You're just getting a feel what did this writer feel like when he was writing this graphic, amazing material? What were the words? What was the pacing of it? How long were the sentences? What were the word choices? And absorb the technique of it, because it will help you to up level. When you read it, you're absorbing the book as a reader. But when you type it, you're absorbing the material as a writer. That's huge. For your edification, for your improvement, type it. Type it. Feel the way it feels when you are at the keyboard. So you're inspiring me.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With your dedication. So how did you take the technical aspect of it, what they did when, where they went, and all these different things, with the emotional drama? People are dying all around and all this noise and the smells and the sounds. How did you get those two to come together?
Well, it wasn't easy. And I would say that the first thing that I did was to defer to the men, meaning I want their words to speak in the book because they were there. I of course wasn't. And and this is specifically for this type of work in this, this nonfiction world, was to listen to them, what they're saying, their emotions. And a lot of it, maybe my experience as an attorney where interviewing witnesses helped, was to ask them the right questions. And that can be very difficult. That if you don't pick up on something. So I would say, first step, listen. Listen. Second step, process what they're saying and get down what they are saying. And then it will come. Now, because you have so many different perspectives, and this is now close to 60 years ago, there's difference in opinion. And that's bound to happen. That actually makes the story more authentic, because nobody is ever going to see the same thing the same way. And in battle, you're focusing on literally the 6 feet in front of you and to each side. And that's your war right there. You don't know what's going on 20 feet to your left or your right or behind you. So each person's war, even though it's the same place, could be very different. And that's exactly, I was actually talking to a veteran yesterday for an interview, and he said, I don't know what was going on the other side of the knoll. You'll have to tell me. So I was able to fill him in just because I knew from the other veterans and I wasn't there. So I would say, number one, listen to who you're talking to if you're writing nonfiction. If you're writing fiction based on a true story, historical fiction, same principle. Listen to your subject, find out as much as you can about it, that person, and channel that as best you can to be more of a vessel rather than someone trying to put their own spin on it, which nothing wrong with that, but that's more of fiction when you're creating a story rather than relating a story. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to say as well that in fiction, it's so important to capture the essence of the reality of it. Even though the situation may be a little different or the personalities may be a little different, you can make up a lot of stuff, but the essence of it needs to be authentic.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And to that point, again, when you're interviewing or talking to someone, and in fiction, trying to find the essence, if you're creating a fiction story in Paris, all right, well, how does Paris smell like in February? And what does it smell like in February 1944 or whatever? It's getting that authenticity. That's a great point for all writing, because if you don't have that authenticity, the reader's not going to connect. So when I interview these Marines from Vietnam, it was, what did it smell like? What did you see? What was the weather like? What did you feel? A lot of these guys would lose 10 to 15 pounds of weight just being in country and marching, and getting those key authentic details for whatever writing you're doing. That's a great point. That's a great point.
Mm-hmm. It's so important to pay attention to the details, the little things, the nuances in any form of writing, because we're trying to convey this impression, this feeling of being there to the reader.
Absolutely.
So would you say that this process has maybe shifted your view of the world?
Oh, absolutely. It's been an incredible process. As far as my world as a writer, patience. You have to have patience, especially if you delve into something like nonfiction where you have to get the details right. So patience. If you're creating a story, even if it's a fantasy world, Game of Thrones, for example, patience, because you have to create that world, and that world has to be authentic. Pay attention to the details and use them as a springboard to create your story. But to your question, has it changed my view of the world? Well, I couldn't tell you exactly how, but I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any way it could not.
No, I would just, from in any endeavor, writing, hard work, perseverance, patience, critique. You've got to have good critique to point out where you may be going in the wrong direction. Writing is almost like you're the pilot, or you're the captain of a luxury liner or a battleship, and if you don't have a good navigator, you could go in the wrong direction. So use your friends, your other readers, other writers to kind of, okay, well, this is great, but you probably need to go in this direction a little bit more. And that's been a great help for me. For these Vietnam novels, I guess you'd call them a novel, the veterans themselves were the ones that kept me on track, because they were great about, this is what I have. Is this accurate? Does this convey yes or no? And they were the ones that helped me get the story right.
Resources are invaluable. When I wrote my historical novel about the Scopes Evolution trial in 1925, I found a resource at a university at the location where the trial happened. And I sent him the manuscript and said, "What's wrong? Tell me what's wrong with it." So the details were correct. So in any arena, fiction, nonfiction, we need to have that perseverance to chase down those people and get their feedback, and be appreciative when they find out something that isn't quite right. Because
absolutely,
we want it. We want it to be right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So going back now to the sculpting part of what you do you feel that, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Which came first? These wonderful statues that you've done. Was that first, or was it the books?
Well, I would say the statues were first. So growing up, I had an artistic bent, still do. And my creative artistic bent comes through writing. And, I've been working on an historical fiction work now for several years, and it allows more creativity than nonfiction. So the creative part kind of came first, but then I had, at an early age, a real love of history. So the two kind of came together when I was at an art gallery in Santa Fe back in the 1990s and saw sculpture and saw how fun that was. And as a way to kind of come down off of being a prosecutor, I would sculpt. And my dog or family or whatever. And then I thought, well, no, let's combine history with that. And so short answer to your question, the sculpture came first, but then I became entranced with the stories that were the basis for the sculpture. And then it became, I need to make a decision. Do I want to keep sculpting or do I want to try something different? And I just felt there were too many stories that would not be told. I said, okay, you go in on writing, make that your outlet. So that was kind of almost a 20-year path from the the two monuments were created in the 2000s. And then about that time, I said, okay, I'm going to write the books about the Vietnam War. And then those came right after it. Does that make sense?
Yes. And if you don't mind to show us the two that you did. And the thing that, well, first of all, if you're not on YouTube and you're listening on Spotify or one of these others, go to YouTube and see these pictures are awesome. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was that they're soldiers. And even back then, you were still that the soldier had your creativity, captured your creativity.
It did. Do you want me to share the screen and see if I can bring some of those up?
Yeah, that would be terrific. Really quickly. So if you're listening in audio, don't go away. It's not going to take.
So this is the Kentucky Medal of Honor Memorial, which depicts John Squires, who was a young 18-year-old from Louisville, Kentucky, who fought at Anzio and in Italy. And this depicts the night of his action during which he earned the Medal of Honor, and sculpted in clay and then cast in bronze. That's a profile of him. This is in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, and next to the World War II Memorial. And then this sculpture is the Texas Medal of Honor Memorial. George O'Brien, who was from Midland, Texas, who was a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in Korea and earned the Medal of Honor in Korea. And once again, this is to honor the soldiers from each specific state, but in reality, to honor all of our soldiers, all of our people who have sacrificed for us so that we can, live the lives that we have. This is another view of the Kentucky Monument.
Mm-hmm. So you were depicting World War II and the Korean War.
Correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
So have you done any sculpting of Vietnam?
No, I haven't. There's a great monument in front. Well, first we have the Vietnam Wall, which is amazing. And then facing that, there are 3 soldiers by Frederick Hart, an incredible sculpture. I could never come close to that. And then Glenna Goodacre did a Vietnam Women's Memorial, which is also nearby. And that's an incredibly moving statue of a nurse helping a wounded soldier. So they did it better than I could, put it that way. And the monuments are very time intensive. They just take a lot of time. For the Texas sculpture, I remember my garage became my studio and I had scaffolding and all of that. It was great. And I'm very glad that I did it, but writing's not as labor intensive, at least physically. Mentally,
at least physically, right.
Mentally more so, probably.
Yes. Would you say that writing a full-length book took more time or less time than doing the...
Oh, wow. Well, I thought I would save time by not doing the sculpture, and I was wrong. So Lions of Medina was published in 2007. That took 5 years. Swift Sword took 5 to 7, but then after a hiatus, another year. I've been working on an historical fiction novel now for 7 years. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't expect this much time to go by to try to get it right. And it's still not right. It's real close. But I said, okay, well, what have I learned? Yes, I have a lot of time invested in all of these projects, 2 sculptures, 2 books, but I am very happy and satisfied with the final product in each case. So that's where I would say to your listeners and viewers, don't rush it. If it's taking a lot of time, have faith in the process, get the right instruction, like from you and from others, because at the end of the day, it'll be there forever. And you want it to be right. So, but that's a great question. I was like, well, I thought I might save time by not doing the sculptures. No, that didn't work out that way, but that's okay. That's perfectly fine. I'm sure you felt that way too with your.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My Christie Award winner took me 2 years of intense work.
Oh yeah. But you're very satisfied. I mean, you got an
Yes.
award. That's incredible because of your hard work and perseverance.
My first
great
book
job.
took me 14 years. So be encouraged. You're only into 7. I did 14 for my first.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you're happy with it. I know that it's awesome, and I know that it's worth it. So
yes.
Yeah, that's the one lesson I've learned from all of these creative processes is that if you persevere, stay confident, get the right instruction, get the right feedback, listen to all of that, and learn from it, you'll be fine in the end. The worst thing you could do is to stop.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. We do reels of our podcast, to get people to listen, and that's going to be on a reel. I'll tell you that.
Great. Well, maybe I need to replay it for myself here when things get frustrating.
Yeah, we all need that little kick in the pants once in a while.
That's true.
You have something for our listeners? A link or something?
A link or an excerpt, or what did you wanted a?
Where can they go to get more? I guess I didn't say the question very well.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So December 16th to the 21st, we're really honoring our Vietnam veterans. We're going to run a special on the ebook and the print of Swift Sword, which you can find on Amazon. Just Doyle Glass or Swift Sword or both. The Marines of Mike 35. You can find it there. And that week, we're honoring the legacy of these men. So a great time before Christmas to share their stories to an uncle or a grandfather that was in the war. Also, DoyleGlass.com, which has, that's a great website because we post on Facebook for Doyle Glass author, and then also on Instagram, stories of real heroes, everyday heroes. So something uplifting, the news that we hear, we try to feature someone who's done something heroic. It could have been a child or an elderly person, but we really try to feature unsung heroes. So Amazon, Doyle Glass, the book is Swift Sword, The Marines of Mike 35, September 4th, 1967. And then, of course, the website, DoyleGlass.com, and on Facebook and Instagram.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
You. It's great. Thank you. It's encouraging. I love talking to other writers. I love hearing the stories of the uphill battles and the conquests. And, there are not that many writers that I can talk to. So just talking with you has been great. It's been awesome.
I think we all feel that way.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
And thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time. Bye now.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana Mcara, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.